It may look like I'm not doing anything, but I actually am. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the latest edition of the Sports Management Club Virtual Speaker Series. Tonight, we have what I consider one of the legendary guys here in Indianapolis, Indiana Pacers play-by-play announcer for television, Chris Denari, who is also a voice, the Turn 4 voice, as Kyle and I were just talking about, the Turn 4 voice at the Indianapolis 500. So Chris has been gracious enough to give us some time from him here to sit with us and talk about, his background in television, radio, sports information, his college time, as well as what's it like being the Pacers play-by-play guy. Welcome aboard, Chris.
Hey, thanks so much. It's really cool to have a chance to visit with all of you. What's really interesting for me is I just played golf earlier this afternoon with two high school buddies. One just turned 60, one will turn 60, and I'll be 60 in January, but we don't feel that old. And I'm not saying I'm as young as Kyle or many of you that are watching this Zoom, but I think it's all about how you approach it and how you feel. And for me, I look back at my career that is still going. Clearly, it is more toward the end than it is at the beginning of where many of you are and where many of you hope to be. But it's been a real blessing to be able to do it here in Indianapolis. What was important for me growing up, my dad was a high school teacher and a coach. And so I was sitting on the bench of his high school basketball team when I was 5 years old. And I was keeping stats. I think that's where I, learned how to keep. At that point was called OER and DER, offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency. So this was back in the 70s, and my dad was doing analytics. We're all into analytics now, but he was computing and figuring offensive and defensive efficiency. So I think for me, being around sports, as a young kid, and then playing high school sports, going to Wabash, playing college basketball, this is where I wanted to be. You never know if you are good enough to get there. You never know if your network is strong enough to get you there. But it is definitely something that I wanted to do. And, here I am, almost 40 plus years out of college, sitting here talking to you as the TV voice of the Pacers. So I think as I talk to you, we all have different journeys. We're all not going to either get to where we want to go or get to where we think we should go or get there in the same route. And so I think you have to be comfortable with that, knowing that there are many different ways to get to where you want to go, or sometimes you have to take a detour. And I think the best thing that happened to me was I had to take a little bit of a detour. I started out in radio in Columbus, Indiana for 6 months. I was the news and sports director at a small radio station making $200 a week. But for me, it was the chance to start my career. I went to Channel 59 when it went on the air in 1984. It was then WPDS, and I was the sports director. So I was on the news, 10 o'clock news every night for the period of about 6 months. I was 24 years old, and they walked in one day and said, "We're not doing news anymore. You all don't have a job." So I was unemployed at the age of 24, building a starter house with my wife. And my wife and I have been married 36 years. We're high school sweethearts. And at this time, she was a hairstylist. She still is, but she was making far more money than I made. I mean, she was the breadwinner. I was just the guy dabbling in sports. So here I am. I have no job. Network Indiana hires me. So I'm doing afternoon drive time sports. They walk in about a month after I'd been hired and said they couldn't pay me. They didn't have enough in their budget. So I was unemployed again. So this is when I made the move into sports information, sports communications. And fortunately was able to get the job at the University of Indianapolis, then Indiana Central. And that started my career from 1985, really until I was the sports director at Channel 59 in 2004. For about 20 years, my full-time job was not in sports broadcasting. It was in sports PR, communications, and marketing. And I think that really was advantageous for me because I learned a lot about the business of sports, not just about the business of broadcasting, but the business of sports. So sometimes your career will take a detour and you have to be able to adapt. And I think that's one of the things that I was able to do is I was able to adapt. And that led me, I was the very first sports marketing director at Butler. And for all of you students that are, what are your ages? 18 to 23. Butler in 1989 was not the Butler that it is now. It was a basketball program that was more Division III than Division I. They did not have a commercial radio contract, and they had no corporate sponsors. And so that was my task. And I embraced the task. I like building. And, I can say that I was there on the ground floor building Butler they are what they are now. But I was there. And with that, I became the radio voice of Butler basketball. And so I owe some kudos, to a number of people through my career. Clearly at UIndy, because that's when I started doing play-by-play. Clearly to the people at Butler, because when Butler basketball became good in the late 90s, they didn't have games on television. The only way you could follow Butler basketball was listen to radio. And so people would listen to me do the games on radio, and that helped me build my brand. In 1999, I made a decision, and it was, we all have, as we move forward, we have families, we have kids, we need to make more money. I had been at Butler 10 years, and I opted to step out of the university side, and I went to work for one of my sponsors, which was Methodist Sports Medicine Center. And I became the first director of sports communications and marketing. And so what it did for me is I learned to work with doctors. I learned more about sports management and sports marketing on a different side. I was the buyer now instead of the seller. And the people at Methodist Sports Medicine also allowed me the opportunity to stay as the voice of Butler. I became the post-game radio host for the Colts. It was during this time that I started working at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway radio network. In 2000, the Indiana Fever franchise started, and the Pacers, when Mark Boyle didn't want to do it, the longtime radio voice of the Pacers, they said, we need somebody that people know. I got the job. So I've had a lot of opportunities and a lot of breaks, and that's been very important in my career. So I'm just trying to give you a little background about how I got started. And what I like to tell people is, and somebody may ask me the question, I have a lot of friends in the broadcasting business. An acquaintance that many of you may know, Joe Davis, who's the voice of the LA Dodgers. He's on Fox. I mean, he's a former Division III athlete. He's probably in his early 30s. His career has gone like this. My career is like most people. It's like this, taking a stair step. And you have to be comfortable with how you get there. And this is a number of years ago when I met Joe at a Butler game. He was doing it for FS1. His fiance, now his wife, was with him. He wanted to introduce her to me because he had heard Chris Denari, I take this as a compliment, is a regular guy. He's married to his high school sweetheart, blah, 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 blah. And so I got to know Joe, and he called me one day, and this is when the Dodgers stuff was happening and Fox and all that. And he goes, hey, Chris, just wanted to pick your brain. What were you thinking when you were 28? I said, well, Joe, I was just trying to survive. Because I'm not Joe Davis. Joe Davis was on a fast track, and that's great. But a lot of us, we're not on that fast track. And so you've got to take it a step at a time. Quite honestly, for me, It was the best way to do it. It also gives me a great appreciation now, getting ready for my 15th year as the TV voice of the Pacers. I truly appreciate what I have. So I think that's really important as well. I know that may be a long, drawn out intro from me, but I just want to give you the background of how I got into this business and really the diversity that I've shown. I know a lot of people that are just broadcasters. I like the fact that I was a broadcaster. I was an SID. I was in marketing. I was in communications. I sold. I bought. I think that's been really good for me. I think it's also good when I read an ad on a Pacer game. You know, you have the drops that you have to read. I know how important that is. I know who sold it. I know who bought it. It's not just a throwaway ad. So I think all those things have been very helpful in my career.
So, Chris, you talked a little bit about, your introduction in college at Wabash. Being a Wabash man, what were you able to do out in Crawfordsville during your time as a student to get you prepared for all of this?
Well, I think, Jeff, the thing for me, the advantage at Wabash is they had a radio station. They didn't have a lot of people involved in the radio station. And when I got there as a freshman, I was the oldest of 5. So I was the first kid to leave the coop. And my dad had taken me over. And I'll take you back. I used to do fake play-by-play of games into a tape recorder in my room when I was like 10. I'd play Stratomatic baseball and all that kind of stuff. And so my dad said to me, he said, "Hey, there's a table over there that says WNDY radio. I think you ought to go over there and talk to them. I think you'd be good at that." And so my dad recognized that I really enjoyed sports. I was an English major, speech minor at Wabash. And he just said, "You ought to go do that." So from day one, as a freshman, I was involved in the radio station. At one point, again, Wabash is a small school. I was the sports director of the radio station and the sports editor of a weekly campus newspaper. And I was doing all that at the same time while I was taking classes. So I got very involved early on because I knew that disadvantage being at Wabash is at the time you weren't at Ball State. You weren't at Butler. Butler had a really good broadcasting program then. You weren't at IU. You weren't at Missouri, Syracuse. So I needed something more. I had to be involved. And so from day one, I got very involved. I became the voice of the football team as a sophomore and did it for 3 years. And so that was really important for me.
So, you always get the opportunity. Well, I mean, not always, but you get the opportunity every now and then to do not only the Pacers, not only certain games and certain, races, for instance, the granddaddy of them all, but you also get the opportunity to do the Monon Bell every now and then.
Yeah.
How does that feel when you go back to do something like the Monon Bell, where you started out all of this process on your trajectory that kind of went up and down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real thrill. In fact, the first time I did the Monon Bell game was a year after I graduated from college. They had what I would call a professional broadcaster, and then I represented Wabash, and they had somebody represent DePaul. So it's like one of the few times I've ever done color in my life. I was an analyst. But when I did it a couple of years ago, we did it in Greencastle at Blackstock Stadium. Ironically, there was some question from the DePaul side. They said, "Well, is he going to favor Wabash?" Well, I did the play-by-play, and somebody who was a DePaul grad did the color. And I said, ironically, I had never met the Wabash football coach at the time, Don Morell, and Bill Lynch was the coach at DePaul, and I had worked with him at Butler. I said, I know more DePaul players and coaches than I do at Wabash. So that was interesting, and it worked out fine. I mean, it turned out to be a great game. My job is to call it down the middle, and I think I did a good job of that. But it was special to be able to do something that really, started my career, because that's when I started doing play-by-play, and that's when I realized that that's what I wanted to do. Now, I didn't know if I'd be able to ever get paid to do it. I thought maybe it'd just be a hobby on the side. But, to be able to go back and to fit that into my Pacer schedule, it was a really cool thing to do.
So you've had the awesome pleasure of doing a lot of great Pacers games, and obviously Wabash DePaul de Monon-Bell is historic every year. You were there for the 100th running of the 500, right? You got to work that. But let's step back to earlier in your career when you started out at 59, right? Fox 59.
Yeah.
And talk about that progression a little bit from being in the hard news slash sports and
Yeah.
transferring all those skills into the PR side and then eventually into the play-by-play side.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the thing that I learned early on when I was at Channel 59, and I was in my 20s, is how you have to, you're chasing stories, and right or wrong, there is a competition locally of who can get the story first. Now, it's critical. Not only do you get it first, do you get it right? And I think that's what you're trying to do. Then I worked on the PR side, and you're right. I worked in PR, I worked in sponsorship, and then I went back into TV in 2004 and worked at Channel 59, and it was even more competitive then, in trying to chase stories and break stories and those kinds of things. So that's why I say now I really enjoy what I do now, because I get calls all the time from media. Hey, what do you know about the Pacers coaching search? What's happening with Victor Oladipo? And I'm like, one, I don't know. Two, I don't want to know. And three, while I might want a certain coach to work with, or I like certain players, when I show up, whenever the season starts, whoever the coach is and whoever the players are, that's who I'm going to deal with. And I don't have to try to find out who's who or what. And so while I think I was pretty good at it, I didn't enjoy it that much. I mean, I enjoy the actual games rather than chasing, playing silly season. I enjoy reading silly season about NASCAR and IndyCar and, in the NFL and Major League Baseball and in the NBA, who's going to get traded, but I don't have to chase it. Like I said, I thought I did an all right job. I was decent at it, but it's not something that I really enjoy.
And now that you're in the play-by-play world, right? And obviously we could actually look at that as kind of an upward trajectory with the difficulty of things, right? You start out trying to chase news. Now you're pushing the agenda a little bit with PR. Now you are kind of the news. And now as your IMS guy, you're part of the fastest thing that you could ever do, right? So your mind has to be working all the time. So when you transferred all those skills, what kinds of skills did you have to take from Wabash to 59 and so on and so forth?
I think the biggest thing for me is be prepared and do your work. I mean, that's, I think it's really important. Some people might call it be over prepared, especially when I look at racing. I only do a handful of races a year. This year, I did, during Brickyard weekend, I did 3 because there was an IndyCar race, an Xfinity race, and then a Cup race. And then I did the 500. I don't do those all the time. So I'm pretty elaborate in my preparation. Do I spend too much time doing it? Oh, somebody could argue yes, but you are judged in that window, right? You are judged, whether it's a basketball game or a race. How do you handle that 3 hours? And if you don't do the preparation, you will be exposed. There's just no question about it. I'm not good enough without that preparation. And I think most people are like that. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I found throughout my entire career, whether I was working in PR, marketing, communications. I mean, if you are dealing with a sponsor, so for instance, if I'm at Butler and I was selling sponsorships, if you're not prepared going into that meeting with the potential partner, and you don't know what their business is about, and you don't know what they're trying to get out of a potential sponsorship, then you've not done your job. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've always really focused on, being as prepared as possible for what lies ahead. And so I just think that's the most important thing. I think the other thing that you have to do, especially as a broadcaster, and it's not an ego thing, but you have to go back and either listen to or watch your broadcasts. You are just like one of the athletes. I mean, when I talk to high school students or kids that are doing high school broadcasts, and a number of them are athletes. I remember talking to a kid at Warren Central who was doing Warren Central basketball, but he was also a football player. And I said, how often do you listen to your basketball broadcasts? He goes, well, I really don't listen to them. I go, okay. How often does your football coach make you watch video of your play from the previous Friday? All the time. Well, I go, doing the games is just like playing in the game. You've got to watch and be critical of yourself. I think that's the only way you get better. I still do that now. A lot of times what I do on nights that I'm sitting here at this desk prepping for the next game, I will, on my iPad or my computer, I will have either one of our pass games on or the opponents on. And I have the pass game on to listen, not necessarily watch, but listen. What did my voice sound like? Was I too excited? Was I not excited enough? Did I lay out when I should have? Did I not? That's really important. And then the other thing is being prepared. I listen usually to at least 2 prior games of the team we're playing, because some of the best information you get in being prepared are nuggets from the home announcers. They are going to have things or stories that don't appear in notes. And so that's the biggest thing that I would say. And it's not just in broadcasting. Like I said, I tried to be very prepared when I was selling sponsorships, and I was very prepared when I was buying, because I was spending an organization's money, and I worked for doctors, and, doctors are concerned about their overhead. So I had to do my homework on a potential partnership to go to the doctors to tell them why we should do this. And if you don't do your homework, then you're just not doing your job.
So that kind of branches in. We're going to dive into the questions here in a moment, but
Yeah.
It kind of branches into the first. It's not really a question, but more of a comment from Aaron Breaksma, who I think shadowed you at one point.
Yes. Yep.
And
hey,
Aaron first off said, how did your golf round go? Which you've already discussed. And second, do you have your game notes with you?
Oh, I can. Yeah.
The legendary Chris Denari game notes.
Yeah. Let me pull one.
So if you haven't noticed, he's talking about preparation. Okay. For those of you listening, he's talking about preparation. These are legendary.
This is
2 or 3 seats from him, and these are legendary.
This is game 4 against the Heat. Unfortunately, a sweep. So that's just sort of the cover with the notes that I make. But then inside, that's it. Every game.
I right now, Chris, wish that I could hear what people might be saying and thinking, because I see you write on that thing and switch pens and highlighters every game, and I just crack up.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is we all develop our own prep style. And for me, a lot of it's on the computer, but a lot of it's colored pens and all that kind of stuff. And the colors all mean something to me. And fortunately, I have good handwriting. Fortunately, I didn't inherit a bad gene in that area, or I write like a doctor, because we know doctors write very poorly usually. But yeah, it's just something that I've developed. I enjoy it. What I've said is, when I don't enjoy doing the prep, then I'll know it's time to leave. I'll know it's time, but I really enjoy sitting down and doing it so that when I go into the game, I feel as prepared as possible. Now, you still have to execute it. You can do the best score sheet and have the best preparation, but if you don't do a good job on the air, you're probably not going to work. So, but for me, this is sort of my backbone. This is the important part that gives me the confidence each and every game that I'm ready to go.
So beyond just what you do as the play-by-play, with the Pacers and anything you've done, how important in your eyes is connecting with people?
Yeah.
And not just you're a broadcaster, so you're going to connect with people probably more naturally than others because they see you. You're the face, right?
Yeah.
But to get to where you are, how do students? What kind of advice would you give students as far as connecting with people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing you have to do is you have to take advantage of relationships. Like I said, so the first job I got in Columbus was because of my dad. I had no job coming out of Wabash. I had sent cassette tapes. Again, how old am I? I sent out cassette tapes. I didn't have a website. So I sent out cassette tapes all over the place. No hits. I did have one hit, didn't get the job. So I have no job. I've got buddies going to law school, med school, working for banks, whatever. My dad, who went to IU, he said, I know this guy. I used to play ping pong with him, in one of the dorms, Sam Simmermaker. Sam is a legend down in Columbus. He's still down there. And he goes, I'm going to call Sam and see if he knows of anything that might be available. So he calls Sam. Sam tells him, this is ironic, Bob, my dad. He goes, my competition, the sports director just left. You ought to have your son call. I called, went down, interviewed, got the job. Again, the connection was my dad. You have to take advantage of connections, people that relationships that you have built. I'm one of those that I enjoy talking to people. And so it's not real. I know for some people it's hard. For me, it's not really hard with just, getting to know somebody. But when you do that, the tentacles go out and you create this network. And that, I think, is the most important thing, because I'll be honest, I think back in the day when I was at Butler and I was hiring positions, there were a lot of people that were equal, right? Resumes were the same. They had the same level of experience, but there was always somebody that you seemed, man, I know the reference on there. I'm going to call. And that was a heads up for that person. And so now they still have to be good enough to get the job, but that really helps them a lot. So I just think that the key is doing that. And from an extracurricular standpoint, doing as much as you can outside of the classroom, outside of what you're learning, at IUPUI, being engaged, being willing to step out of your comfort zone. I think that's one of the things, for me, even though I had covered racing, when they asked me to be a part of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network, it was a little bit out of my comfort zone. I hadn't called racing, but it was something that I was honored to be a part of. I knew there'd be a lot of people listening, and it was just something I wanted to do. So I stepped out of my comfort zone, even though I had never done play-by-play of a race before. So I think those are the two things that I would say: step out of your comfort zone and be as connected and networked as much as you can.
So yeah, that has to be a little bit different going from a 2-hour long basketball game to a 10-second every 2-minute type of thing going around the racetrack. Kyle, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit. We've got some questions for Chris, and I'm going to let you guys handle that. And I'm going to just kind of sit back, drop your questions if you have more for Chris, because he's got a lot of knowledge, a lot of stories. He's witnessed a whole bunch of things. He's been a part of history a couple of times. Talk to him, ask him questions, throw them out there. Kyle, take the reins.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of focus on, Pacers games in general for the first few questions. So our first question is, how long does it take you to prepare for each broadcast, and how much information do you bring into each broadcast? Obviously, we saw what you just wrote, and that's a lot of information, but what does all that mean?
I think the one thing, here's the thing that I will say about as I prepare this scorecard. I don't feel like I won't. I won't use all that information that I prepared. It's there. It's like an open book test. I think that's the thing that I've learned as a broadcaster is just because it's there, you don't have to use it. You need to fit in. It needs to work. And so for me, let's go on a typical. Let's just say it's a Wednesday game and it's now Tuesday. Now this is also pre-COVID, so I don't know what will happen. I mean, I can tell you what we did in the bubble, but pre-COVID, if it's a home game on a Wednesday, team usually practices at 10 o'clock. I go down, watch practice, talk to the coaches, talk to the players after practice, just see what the vibe is, anything new. Are they thinking about, making a personnel change? Are they thinking, hey, Nate, well, Nate's not the coach anymore, but Nate said, hey, we might play a little bit more zone or whatever. So you're around. I would usually then start that night, probably about 7 or 8 o'clock, right when games come on. And I would sit here at my desk and begin to start the chart. Now the chart would have already been out of the computer, updated. And then it's for me to do all that penmanship. And so I'm sitting here, reading stuff on the internet, got a game on the TV, one of my former games on the iPad, and I probably will work a lot of times until midnight, 1 a.m. And then the next day on Wednesday, I'm up. My wife and I will do a CrossFit workout from 8:30 to 9:30. I'll be back at the desk at about 10. And I'm pretty much, we get a couple of mailings that day from some people that do some stat work for us and note work for us. So I'm going through that, checking late stories, maybe emails, that kind of thing. And I usually have everything wrapped up about 2 to 2:30, and then, get ready. And I'm at Bankers Life by about 4:30. We have a production meeting at 4:30. The coach talks to the media at 5:15. Then you're out, courtside, just getting everything set. 6 o'clock, we rehearse the open. 6:30, the pregame show starts. If I'm on the pregame show, then I've got a hit in that. Hey, Walter, come back here. You need to stay here. One of the Connecticut dogs is making noise. And then you do the game, and then you're on the post-game show. And then, you get home about 11 o'clock. And so you do that 82 times a year. Most of the time, during the season, it's pretty much, I'd have to say it's a 7-day-a-week job, because even days that you don't have games, you're working ahead because there's going to be a part in the schedule where you're going to play like 6 games in 9 days. So it's just one of those that you just have to manage your time. But from if I was just going to talk about a Wednesday, that's how it'd be. Now, let's say then we were playing on Thursday and we were on the road. Wednesday night, we would fly to the next city in, let's say, Cleveland. And then Thursday morning, you're up 8 o'clock and you're at the desk in your hotel room cramming as much as you can to get ready for a game that night. So, that's a little bit of it. Like I said, I love it. I love the work. I love the preparation. And if I ever don't like it, then again, that will tell me that I don't need to be doing it anymore. But I absolutely love the prep. I love the work, and I love what I do.
Awesome. So kind of sticking to this, so how did you and Quinn adjust from doing play-by-play with the game going on around, like live, versus doing it at Bankers Life with the game going on in the bubble?
Yeah, I will say this. I was very fortunate that when I've done some WNBA games before when I've done them in the studio. And so that was helpful. And then last October, we did the 2 games from India from the Cardinals studio in St. Louis. Now, the difference there is in your headset, you had 12,000 fans making noise. The difference in the bubble, and Jeff knows this, I mean, there were no fans. And so there was created noise and those types of things. It's just something you have to adapt to. You've got to create your own energy because there's no energy coming from around you. There are certain things that when I do a game, quite honestly, I watch the floor. I come back to the monitor for replays or sponsor mentions or those types of things. But I like to watch the game as it's occurring, because then you're able to look at the benches. You can see the officials. You can see people scowl on their face. They're smiling, whatever they're doing. So that was definitely adjustment. But I'll tell you, hats off to everyone across the country, every network. We've all made it look seamless. As I've said, we've all done too good of a job, because I think there's a chance that, especially in the short term, because we don't know about COVID and all that, that this will continue to be the new normal where we won't travel. But it is definitely doable. It's not ideal, but we can still do our job.
Let me ask this, Chris. I'm going to interject for a moment. You just said something about maybe this is the new normal and you don't travel. That's been going on for a while in
Yeah.
other sports.
Yes.
Is that something that was headed that route, NBA? Were they considering it, or has this been the swift kick in the rear end to send it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be the swift kick. I mean, part of it always comes down to budgets and money, right? And in this pandemic, it has, for everybody, for every sport, it has created big holes financially. And so in my head, I can do the math for the 7 of us that travel for 41 road games, and I'm taking salaries out, but just per diem, hotel, that type of thing. You do the math, there are 30 NBA teams. Start timesing, you start doing the math, there's a lot of money that you're saving. Now, I've done Big Ten football and basketball games where, as the announcers, were on site, but the production is being handled out of Chicago. So that is happening all over the place. I mean, ESPN does a lot of that, where the announcers are on site, and the camera people are there, but everything's being shipped to Bristol or to Charlotte. So that's a possibility as well. We just don't know. I mean, but again, just like people working from home, virtually, businesses have found that people are very productive and successful and saving money. And so, is that a possibility? Sure it is. We'll just have to wait and see.
We have a lot of students asking, what's your favorite memory calling a game, or what's your favorite moment that you've been a part of, whether it's with the Pacers or.
I had a lot of, I go back to Butler. I'll start there, is because, when I started in 1989, Butler basketball was an afterthought. And to go to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 35 years, in 1997, then 98, in 2003, going to the Sweet 16 for the first time. Those were all special moments for me because I had been there in watching it grow. And so there were a ton of, games that I've called. I've done 14 years of Pacer games. I've not been able to do those Miami playoff games in 13 and 14 because we ended after the first round. But I think about, last year beating the Lakers by 40 with LeBron was awesome. Victor hitting shots, last second shots, big wins. I mean, I've always told people I've probably had more of a top 10 or a top 15 than just one game. And I've called a number of high school state championships. Luke Zeller, one of the 3 Zeller brothers, hit a 3/4 court shot for Washington to win the state championship back in the early 2000s. That was really cool. Indy 500s, for me, and people tell me this all the time, I sort of have 2 iconic calls. 2011, J.R. Hildebrand's a rookie leading the Indianapolis 500, coming to the final corner, and he hits the wall. I had that call. And then, back 2006, I think, was 13, 14 years ago. Marco Andretti is a rookie. He's a teenager. and he's leading the 500 coming into the final turn. And my comment was, I said, can a teenager win in Indy? I didn't say he would win, and I'm glad I didn't, because Sam Hornish Jr. got him at the line. But it's, and those aren't anything you prepare for. I mean, you can't prepare for those. You just better make sure you get them, because if you don't, Walter, come here. He's looking for some of that cool Connecticut water. He's banging his head on the door. If you don't make those calls at the right time, you're gonna live with it forever. So, been very fortunate to be on the right side of that. So, yeah, I mean, I can go back to my Wabash days. I mean, Wabash football was undefeated in 1982. They were 10-0. Ironically, we had won the national championship. I was on that basketball team in the spring, and Wabash beat Dayton, who was at that point a Division III power, and then beat DePaul in the Monon Bell game. So, yeah, I probably have a top 20. One day I'll make a list.
So you're talking about like those moments you don't plan for. So how do you come up with like things on the fly to like, commentate those moments? Obviously you didn't plan for them. So
yeah, I mean, I think, part of it is just experience. I do think the one thing you do, and I mentioned preparation, I do think over the years, having listened to how other broadcasters handle late game situations or, spontaneous reaction. I mean, Jim Nance has always said that he does not script anything out for the Masters or for the NCAA tournament, the national championship game. He's good enough that it almost sounds like he has, but he hasn't. So I think all that's preparation, and it's confidence. It's confidence that you'll say the right thing. And so I think that's what's worked for me.
So we have an unusual question, but I mean, it's probably true for you. Does your job ever take a toll on your throat? So you're obviously calling, 82 games.
Yeah, ironically, here's the one time, and my boss was pretty mad at me that day. Ironically, it was after the Monon Bell game a couple of years ago. So I was under the weather already, not feeling well, and it was November. I had done a Friday night Pacer game. Saturday was the Monon Bell game. These smaller stadiums, they don't have big booths. So we were outside. It was freezing cold, and I could tell my voice, was not where I wanted it to be, but I made it through the game. So then I have a Pacer game the next day. So I went Pacer game, Monon Bell game, Pacer game. And so my voice, I could barely do the tease to the game. And we go through the first half, and I'm struggling. I mean, it's the rare time that I've ever struggled. And my boss, Jamie Burns, who's our director, he wants to pull me like mid-game and bring Pat Boylan in. And Pat's a great young broadcaster. He's filled in for me for the 2 games that I've missed in my career, and he does the Fever. And I was like, no, I'm not going off the air. I was an ass. I mean, that's not my persona, but it was like, I'm not giving in, And what was happening was I was drinking so much. I was drinking as much fluid as I could. Every time out, I would sprint to the bathroom and then sprint back. And fortunately, they would have Jeremiah Johnson. If I didn't make it back in time, he would take it out of the break. But that's the one time that my boss was really pissed at me. He really was. We laugh about it now. Didn't laugh about it then, but that's really the only time I can remember that I've had an issue with my voice.
So we have a few more life questions,
Yeah.
but I'm going to kind of feed off this one. And so how are you flexible with, obviously before COVID, you traveled with the Pacers, went to every away game. So how did you do that, but also, have family time and create time for yourself during those busy times?
Well, there's no question. I mean, I owe a great deal to my wife. I mean, she's been awesome. She's been so supportive of my career. I mean, back, again, as I told you about how you stair step it. I mean, there was a time back in the from 1999 to 2004 when I was the director of sports marketing communication at Methodist Sports Medicine. I had a full-time job. I would work 8 to 5, 8 to 6 every day, and I was doing 35 to 40 Butler games, 35 to 40 Fever games. I was doing the high school state finals. I was doing the 500. I was doing the Brickyard. And I was doing 20 Colts postgame shows. That's a lot of time. That's a full-time job right there, right? So you could basically say I had 2 full-time jobs. So it's being the best husband and father you can be. The one thing that we would always do, my wife and I, is when opportunities came our way, we would sit down and say, okay, how does this help us from a family standpoint? Does it fit? How does it help us financially? Those types of things. So it wasn't just me making the decision. That would not have been fair to my wife or my 3 boys. We always made the decision of how it would affect positively or negatively the family. Now, for me, as the son of a coach, I can't tell you how cool it was to get out of elementary school. My mom would pick us up and drop my brother and I off at the high school, and we'd be at practice. So I tried to do that, as much as I could with my kids. When I was the sports marketing director at Butler, my kids had the run of Hinkle Fieldhouse. I mean, they had birthday parties at Hinkle. So you try to take advantage of all the opportunities that you have. Is it easy? No, it's not easy, but you make the best of it. Sometimes I don't know how we got through it. I mean, I really don't. But it's something that, I look back and it paid off. So again, have to have a supportive spouse, partner that allows you to have the ability to do what you love to do.
Yeah, I mean, with going into the sports industry, that's pretty important for everybody just because,
Yeah, here's the thing. Sports are usually played at nights and on weekends, right? And so they don't play a lot. Now, they did in the bubble, but they don't play a lot of games at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday.
So, well, let's feed through the questions here. So here's a question about announcing. How do you know? Sorry, that was my dryer. How do you know the amount to call over a big moment on TV? Obviously, you don't want to overcall the moment, and you don't want the broadcast to go silent.
Yeah, great question. I think that's the biggest thing as a TV broadcaster you have to deal with. Radio is easy. Radio, there's no picture. So you have to be the eyes of the listener. So you've got to deliver everything so that you can picture that in your mind. I did this on Saturday. I was mowing the lawn, and a guy named Andrew Monaco, I met in the WNBA, was the voice of the Orlando Miracle, the San Antonio team, worked for the Spurs. He's now the voice of Texas A&M. And I listened to him on Saturday, the game against Florida. And I texted him after the game and I said, Andrew, you were spot on, fantastic. As I'm mowing the lawn, I could picture the entire game. I could see where everything was happening. That's the sign of a great radio announcer. Television, you have the picture, right? So the one thing that you learn, especially if there's a big crowd, let the crowd carry it. If there's a big shot, lay out. Let the crowd tell the story. Allow the director to put the pictures on the screen that tell the story. And, I think back to the Masters last year when Tiger won. One of the best jobs that Jim Nantz has ever done. We all know how good Jim Nantz is. He didn't say a word. When Tiger was walking off the course and he was hugging his kids and he was hugging his mom and people were coming up to him, you just heard the crowd. You never heard Jim Nantz. And that was fantastic television. So that's the thing that I think you learn when you're in the business. Do we always get it right? No, but I think for the most part, we all do a pretty good job of that.
Guy that I've really
I'm gonna
enjoyed
let him out.
on that is
Hey,
Joe
Walter.
Buck. Joe Buck does that really, really well. What
Yeah.
Chris was just talking about. He did it with the 16 World Series with the Cubs really,
Yeah.
really well. Just
Yeah.
Bryant fielded the ball, and he just
Right.
that was the end of it for him.
Yeah, and a lot of it's feel. I mean, you just have to. It's feel.
What is it that they say, Chris? Let it breathe.
Let
Is
it
that what
breathe.
they say?
Let it breathe. And here's the story. When I first got the Pacers job in 06, crowds weren't very good. Team wasn't very good. There was no energy in the building. And I told my boss and our producer, I said, look, I may talk more than a play-by-play on television, play-by-play guy on a television needs to talk, because if I don't talk, it's dead. And the last thing you want is to tune into a game and it's just dead. So I think it's all about adapting to what you see and to where your team is and how you have to handle it. Again, there's no cookie cutter approach, but there are some right ways to do it and some wrong ways to do it.
So you obviously call for TV, and you just mentioned, dead stadiums like before. So how does like a packed stadium, like for a playoff game in recent years for the Pacers, like transition like to TV for you? Like how much better does that make calling the game for you?
I mean, it's just the energy. I mean, the energy that it gives you, that the build up, it just makes it so much better. I mean, that's the one thing that was hard in the bubble, was just creating that energy and knowing, am I shouting too much? Am I too loud? Am I not loud enough? And usually you don't have that problem when you've got the ambient the sound behind you. So it is definitely easier doing it, with a crowd. There's no question about that. We all would choose to do that.
So another question, you're obviously human, so you obviously have good days and bad days. So how do you overcome a bad day and still manage to stay consistent on air for a Pacers game? Or
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, because you're right, we're all human, and if you have a family, I mean, you're going to have highs and lows, ups and downs. I had I raised boys. I mean, we know how teenagers can be. I went through, my dad passed away 3 years ago, had some health issues, Parkinson's. And so there were times that, things weren't good with him. I'd find out that day that, he had taken a step backward. But once the game started, I needed to be at my best. And so it's almost like you have to compartmentalize. It's up here in your brain and you're thinking about it, but you also have a job to do. And so while we are human, and while those things are super important, and I'm not saying that fans don't care about your personal life and those types of things, is they've tuned in to watch the game, and you've got to be able to deliver that for them. So, for 2.5 hours, whatever that is, you've got to get in this box if things aren't going well, personally or with your family or those types of things. And you've got to make sure you're doing what you need to do. Then when that game is over, you can go, God, I need to call my family. I need to find out whatever. But for that 2.5 hours, you've got to be focused and zoned in.
So just like in any job, you obviously have to develop chemistry with who you work with. So how do you develop chemistry with who you're calling games with? And then more specifically with Quinn Buckner, how do you guys prepare with each other before a game?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the hardest things for me was when I first took the Pacers job, I worked with 2 analysts, and some nights it would be, or some weekends it'd be Quinn on a Friday, Clark Kellogg on a Saturday. And many of you, have seen Clark Kellogg do games on CBS. He was a longtime Pacers announcer. And so that was different, because each person is different in how they approach the game and how they acknowledge the game and how they analyze the game. But I think for Quinn and I, it's you just get in a comfort zone. Once you've been around each other, I don't think it's anything where we sat down. We probably sat down early and just talked about our philosophies and what we hope to accomplish. But I think the thing you find out when you're the play-by-play person on television is you've got to enable the analyst to be him or herself, because they're the ones that are going to tell you how and why something has happened. The play-by-play person is who, what, where. So I give you the facts and Quinn tells you why it's happening. And I think once you get into that mode, everything works out well. I've worked with a lot of different analysts, having done Big Ten Network. If I would do 4 football games a year and sometimes I do 3 or 4 basketball games, I might work with 6 different analysts and work with people I'd never met before. I feel like I'm a pretty easy person to get to know. And once it doesn't take me very long, once we've started to figure out who and how this person reacts to things, and then you just go from there.
So this one's kind of backtracking to balancing your obligations and stuff. So how did you balance your obligations with multiple organizations early on in your career, and how have you been able to build on those relationships and opportunities as your career has progressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I owe it to, I go back to the people at Methodist Sports Medicine. My boss was outstanding. I think they saw me as a real asset in the marketplace, that I wasn't just Chris Denari, their marketing person. I was Chris Denari, a broadcaster. And that when people heard me on the air, whether I was doing a Fever game, a Butler game, the 500 or whatever, people said, hey, that's that guy I met the other day at Methodist Sports Medicine. And maybe it gave a sense of pride to the doctors or the staff. So, but at the same time, I think it's paying attention to all of the things that you need to do at your full-time job and your part-time job. So I always sort of looked at it as extensions of what I was doing from a full-time standpoint. And again, was just very blessed to, have people that trusted me, that I could compartmentalize what this was. And then when I took the job in 2004 at Channel 59, they came to me because they'd had some issues in their sports department, and I was at Methodist Sports Medicine, and they said, we really think you'd be a real asset as our sports director, our main sports anchor. And I said, well, that's great. I think I'd be interested. However, if you tell me I have to give up one of my play-by-play opportunities, and at the time that was Butler, Fever, 500, high school, and then the Colts postgame show, I said, I will not come. I said, I'm not trying to be a hard ass, but I go, this is my passion. I think my passion will assist me in helping your TV station. And they allowed me to do it. So I give them a lot of credit for allowing me to do that. And, I never shirked my responsibilities with the TV station, to do something, at Butler, but it miraculously, it all fit. I was able to make it all fit.
So kind of on that note, we have some guests here in the audience who are, obviously looking to be an announcer. And one is asking, when getting into the industry, what are some ways you can get comfortable in front of a microphone?
Sometimes that's, you just have to have that confidence. It's how you present yourself. I honestly, it started for me when I was a kid. I mean, I honestly used to do fake play-by-play with commercials into a tape recorder. And so the microphone for me never frightened me. I always just felt confident around it. But I also know that, and we've all seen it can be a detriment, right? If you say something, Tom Brenneman, may have torched his career. the Reds announcer, because of what he said into the microphone. So I look at a microphone, whether it's into a tape recorder or whether it's live and I'm doing play-by-play, is something that's always live, and you've got to treat it the right way. But I just have always felt confident around a microphone. Now, if I had to sing with a microphone, no, I would not have that confidence. But talking about sports, I've been fine with it.
So all along, you've obviously talked about, preparation, organization, being an announcer. So what is something that is often overlooked when being an announcer that not most people would know about?
Well, I mean, I think it's the time you put in. Some people, I'm not saying all people, and I think a lot of the people on this Zoom call understand what goes into sports, but I think some people think for a 7:00 game, you roll in about 6:30, you do the game at 7, and then when it's over at 9:30, you just leave and that's all you do. So I just think the preparation that goes into a broadcast is something that a lot of people don't realize. They don't realize all of the things that you do to put yourself in position to do the game.
So we have 3 questions left.
Yeah.
So when working with the Pacers, do you create any connections with certain players and coaches more than others, or do you try to keep it as professional as possible when it comes to interacting with them?
I think you keep it fairly professional. I mean, you have to understand. I'm going to be a 60-year-old guy in January, so I don't have a lot in common with Miles Turner, who's 24, 25. It doesn't mean that, when we're on the road and again, pre-COVID days, you'd come down to go get a bite to eat and you'd see 2 players, sitting in the hotel lobby. You sit down with them, you converse, you're human. That's the thing that I've really enjoyed, getting to know them, not just as a basketball player, but as a person, what makes them tick, those types of things. And certain people, we all know this in life, certain people are easier to do that with than others. During this, playoff run, I've been texting every day with Frank Vogel. Frank was just a wonderful person to be around, from when he was an assistant coach to when he was the head coach. We used to have a thing when he was an assistant coach about the good and the bad of sports. And if it was a bad, I'd get on the plane after a loss and he'd look at me and go, CD, bad day of sports, huh? I go, bad day of sports. And after a great win, I'd get on the plane and go, hey, Frank, great day of sports. And so we had that. And so I sent him a text after they won. And I just said, hey, Frank, great day of sports. And those are you do build a relationship with people, some more personal than others. But I'm not here to be a fanboy, right? I'm a coworker, I'm a peer. And so I take that very seriously.
I run across this guy in the locker room multiple times this season. You, Chris, I run across you multiple times in the locker room as I'm just waiting and listening, trying to find a way to get out of there as fast as possible.
Yeah. Yep.
So looking up at your, stair-step trajectory for your career, is there anything you would change in how things have gone with your path?
No, I would not. I mean, I think, being unemployed twice in the span of 2 or 3 months, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I do think it gave me perspective. Sometimes you got to be knocked down and potentially told you're not good enough. And in those instances, it wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It just was the opportunities, the financial implications weren't there. But it made me, I just think all that I've done over the years, it's just given me a great appreciation for what I have. And I continue to work as hard as I can because again, there are a lot of people out there that would love to have my job. And I know that. And I'd like to do this. I'm 59. I'd like to do this for about another 10 years. I don't think I have any plans of doing this into my 70s. If I could do it for 25 years as the TV voice of the Pacers, I think that'd be pretty cool. And I will continue to work as hard as I've worked the first 14 years, the next 10 or 11. That's my plan.
So our last question. So you mentioned, facing adversity, searching for jobs, early in your career, and obviously people like our age are facing, well, anybody in the world is facing adversity right now, either with, being unemployed or laid off or, so what would be some advice for anyone looking for jobs during a pandemic or, who are facing adversity?
Yeah. Hey, I'm the father of a 24-year-old Ball State grad who's in strategic communications, and it's tough sledding, trying to find jobs. I think what I've encouraged him to do is network. Somebody out there is going to be your champion, right? I've had a number of champions in my career. And when I mean champions, those are people that believe in you and believe that you deserve an opportunity. Now it's up to you to make the most of that opportunity. I've always said, I can help somebody get to the door, but you've got to then open the door and go in and present yourself and then earn the opportunity. So I think it's just inherent that, what I've told my son, who he's very interested in music and photography and those types of things, is right now, that's your passion. That passion may have to be over here on the side, and that you do some other things. If you want to move, he wants to move out of the house. He wants to do this. He wants to do that. Well, you've got to go find a way to make money, right? To support yourself. Doesn't mean you can't do your things you're passionate about, but you do them more in your free time. I think for me, as you can see me talking about my career, my passion was play-by-play. My passion was broadcasting. But for a long time, that was not my full-time job. But I kept it on the side and believed enough in myself that that's what I was able to do. So I just think the thing is, take advantage of relationships, take advantage of people that you know, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Somebody may not be able to help you today, but they may be able to help you tomorrow. And I think that's the most important thing. So you've got to weigh short-term versus long-term.
So Chris, I always like to end the speaker series episode with allowing you to give us some parting shots, some parting words of wisdom, right? Those last few things you want to drop in there, like right at the end of a game, you just got to squeeze it all in. What are your final thoughts, I guess, on the subject for college students, recent grads, anything that you can think of that maybe advice, it doesn't matter, whatever parting shot you may have.
Yeah, again, I think, we've talked about it, is be passionate about what you want to do, because when you're passionate, that seeps out of you. And people that see that passion say, well, that person, he or she really wants to do this. And so when you're passionate, you show that it's real. And so I think that's the most important thing. And then again, be prepared, network, and just do as much as you can. Again, you may not get paid for it for a while. I mean, there were plenty of things that I did as internships when I got let go from those 2 jobs. I mean, I was just doing as much as I could. And I didn't care at that point if I got paid. I just needed the experience. So the other thing is, it's just like when you're selling a sponsorship, you're going to have a lot of no's, right? There's going to be a lot of no's. When you're out in the job market, there are a lot of no's. Don't let no get you down, because you know what? There's going to be a yes out there that will take you to the next level. So I think that's one of the most important things that you'll learn as you move on is you will hear no, but you can't let no get you down.
That's some of my favorite advice. Kyle, do you have anything you would like to ask or add before we let Chris go? He's graciously given us 11 minutes past the time, so I'm excited about the fact that we were able to go over time here.
No, I just want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity. I know the students are really enjoying these episodes, and we really appreciate you coming on and giving them the opportunity and behind the scenes look at into the broadcasting world.
Kyle, thanks. I think the most important thing, and Jeff knows this, I mean, as we get older, and I've tried to do this even, before I turned into my 50s, is we need to give back, because there were so many people, again, as I said, that were my champions that helped. I may be the champion for one of you out there someday. And that's really important, because we want to see sports management, sports broadcasting, sports marketing, it's going to continue to grow. And if we can help achieve that, then that's important to me as well.
See, he's not just a TV personality, gang. He is human. So he is wanting to give back to you. Reach out to him. We can share his email. You can find his email. He's a public figure, right? So you can find his email, reach out to him, ask him questions, ask anything you can of him. Because he's one of the ones that I know will really help you out. And I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you to you, Chris, for coming on here and talking with these students and kind of giving them that inside look as to what they see on television when watching a Pacer game. Now they can say that they actually talk to the man.
Well, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. Glad this worked out tonight. And I hope everyone has a great semester.
Thanks for staying. Thanks for tuning into the third episode of the SMC Virtual Speaker Series. We will be on tap tomorrow at 6 o'clock with Trey Brown from the Indiana High School Athletic Association. He'll join us. He's the coordinator of communications and sponsorship for the IHSAA. He will be jumping on here at 6 o'clock. You've got the registration link. Jump on, register for it. Come see us. It'll be streamed live on YouTube. And Trey's a great guy, IUPUI grad, and he's from our program. So come and support him. And we look forward to another great night. Thank you again to Chris Denari. And you guys all have a great night.